Hello learners, today we are going to discuss about other dimensions which can be significant in the measurement of environmental impact assessment. So mitigation measures and environmental impact assessment reports will come into the picture after auditing. The report should include the actions, steps for preventing, minimizing or bypassing the impacts, or else the level of compensation for probable environmental damage or loss. The main output report is called an environmental impact statement that contains a detailed plan for managing and monitoring environmental impacts both during and after implementation. The audit also serves a useful feedback and also learning function. The heart of the environmental impact assessment process is steps of impact prediction, evaluation, mitigation, and also we have already noted that the process is not linear. Indeed, the entire environmental impact assessment exercise is about the prediction. So it is highly required at the earliest stages when a project including its alternatives is being planned and designed, and it continues through the mitigation, monitoring and auditing. Yet despite the centrality of prediction in environmental impact assessment, there is a tendency for many studies to underemphasize it and also the expense of more descriptive studies. Prediction is frequently not treated as an explicit stage in the process. It is clearly defined models are used for the missing from studies, of course. Even when used, models are not detailed sometimes and there is a little discussion of the limitations. Evaluation follows from prediction and involves an assessment of the relative significance of the impacts and also methods that ranges from the simple to the complex, from the intuitive to the analytical, from qualitative to quantitative, from formal to informal. Cost benefit analysis, monetary evaluation techniques and also multi-criteria and then multi-attribute methods with their scoring and weighting systems and also provide a number of ways into the evaluation issues. Dimensions of prediction, that is what to predict. The main objective of this prediction is to identify the magnitude and other dimensions of identified changes in the environment with a project or an action. In comparison with the situation, without that project or an action, prediction also provide the basis for the assessment of significance. One's starting point to identify the dimensions of the prediction in the United Kingdom is the legislative requirement. That is a case study. Prediction involves the identification of potential change in indicators of environment receptors. Scoping will have identified the broad categories of impact in relation to the project that is under consideration, and if particular environmental indicators, for example sulfur dioxide levels are higher in the atmosphere, that reveal an increasing problem in an area irrespective of the project or an action. For example, it is for the power station. So it will provide to give the predicted forwards as the baseline for this particular indicator. So these indicators are required to be disaggregated and specified to provide variables that are measurable and relevant. For example, an economic impact that could be progressively specified as direct employment, that is a local employment, and also to the local skilled employment. So in this way, a list of significant impact indicators of policy which relevance can be developed. And also an important distinction is quietly made between the prediction of the likely magnitude, that is a size, and the significance, that is the importance of the decision making of the impacts can be ruled it. Magnitude does not always equate with significance. For example, a large increase in one pollutant may still result in an outcome within generally accepted standards. They are the unit of measurement and the distinction between the quantitative and qualitative impacts. Some indicators are more readily quantifiable than others. For example, a change in the quality of drinking water in comparison, and also the impact prediction and the evaluation and mitigation. and also there are changes in the community stress which are associated with the project. So wherever there is a possibility, predictions should present impacts in explicit units that can provide a basis for evaluation and trade-off. Quantification that can allow predicted impacts to be assessed against various local, national and international standards. The prediction should also include estimates of the probability that an impact will occur, which raises the important issue of uncertainty. Methods and models for prediction, and then how to predict. There are many possible methods to predict impacts. A study has been undertaken for the Environmental Resource Limited for the Dutch government in early 1980s and identified 150 different prediction methods which are used in just 140 environmental impact assessment studies from the Netherlands and also North America. But none of these studies provides a magic solution to the prediction problem. All predictions are based on conceptual models of how the universe functions and how they range in complexity from those that are totally intuitive to those based on explicit assumptions which concerns the nature of environmental process. The environment is never as well as behaved as assumed in models, and the assessor is to be discouraged from accepting off-the-shelf formula. Predictive methods that can be classified in many ways. They are mutually exclusive also. In terms of scope, all methods are partial in their coverage of impacts, but some requires to be more holistic than others. Partial methods may be classified according to the type of the projects, that is a retail impact assessment for example, and the type of impact, that is a wider economic impacts, and some may be extrapolative and others may be more normative. For extrapolative methods, predictions are made that are consistent with past and present data, and extrapolative methods, they are having the trend analysis and also modified to take account of changes that are caused by the project, and scenarios, that is a common sense forecast of future state based on a variety of assumption, and also of course analogies, that is a transferring experience from elsewhere to the study in hand, and intuitive forecasting. So these are the some of the factors which can be identified. If it is a normative approach, in that the work backwards from desired outcomes to assess whether a project in its environmental context is adequate to achieve them. For example, a desired socio-economic outcome from the construction stage of a major project may be 50% local employment. The achievement of this outcome may necessitate modifications to the project, or we can say that associated employment policies like training. And there are so many scenarios that may be tested to determine the one most likely to achieve the desired outcomes. Methods that can also be classified according to their form as the following some types, or by adopting some case studies. So here we would like to discuss about some 6 types of model to give the examples. Mitigation is defined in EC directive as measures that is envisaged in order to avoid, reduce and if possible remedy significant providing the remedial measures for the significant adverse effects. And also US Council on Environmental Quality and also its regulations implementing, saying that National Environmental Policy Act that defines mitigation as a not taking certain actions that limits the proposed action and its implementation, whereas significant adverse effects are identified, that means described in that report, and also the measures to be taken to avoid, reduce or remedy those effects like site planning, technical measures or process selection, recycling and pollution control and treatment containment, that is a bundling of storage vessels, or we can say that aesthetic and ecological measures like mounding, design, color and landscaping, tree plantings and measure to preserve particular habitats or create alternative habitats, or recording of the archaeological sites, and the measures to safeguard historic buildings or sites, repairing and rehabilitation or restoring the affected environment. So presentation and maintenance actions during the life of the action and replacing or providing substitute impact prediction, evaluation and mitigation. So all these are some of the resources in the environment. So it is not possible to specify here all the types of mitigation measures that could be used. So a review of EISs for developments similar to the development under the consideration, they also suggest useful mitigation measures. At one extreme, the prediction and evaluation of impacts that reveal an array of impacts with such significant adverse effects that the only effective mitigation measures may be to abandon the proposals altogether. So a less draconian and also more normal situation would be to modify aspects of the development action to avoid various impacts. Examples of method to avoid impacts I would like to give, that is the control of solid and liquid waste by recycling on site or by removing them from the site of environmentally sensitive treatment to elsewhere. So the use of a designated lorry route we have to establish, and also daytime working only we have to, that means stipulate the time periods, and also to avoid disturbance to village communities from construction, that is a lorry traffic, and from the night construction work there should not be any disturbance, and also the establishment of buffer zones and the minimal use of toxic substances, and to avoid impacts on local ecosystems. So these are some of the alternative methods one has to follow. Sometimes the adverse effects may be less easily avoided. So there may also be less need to avoid them completely. They may be the sensitive design of structures we have to use, and using of simple profiles and local materials and muted colors to reduce the visual impact of a development, and landscaping to hide it or blend it into the local environment. So if we know that we have to think about it. So the use of construction site like hostels or coaches for journeys to work to reduce the impact on the local housing market also, and on the roads of a project employing many workers during its construction stage. So instead of that, for staying for those people we have to make arrangements. And the use of silting basins or traps, that the planting of temporary cover crops and the scheduling of activities during the dry months, and to reduce erosion and sedimentation. So all these factors we have to consider before constructing. And during one or more stages of the life of a project, certain environmental components may be temporarily lost, or otherwise sometimes it may be damaged also. So it may be possible to repair or rehabilitate or restore the affected component for the varying degrees, because there should not be any loss. So for example, agricultural land is used for the storage of materials during the construction may be fully rehabilitated, and land used for the gravel extraction may also be restored to agricultural use. But over a much longer period, what will happen, and with the associated impacts according to the nature of the landfill materials used. A river or stream diverted by a road project that can be unconverted and re-established with similar flow patterns as far as it is possible. A local community astride a route to a new tourism facility could be relieved of much of the adverse traffic effects by the construction of a bypass. Of course, it is introduce a new flow of impacts. So there will be invariably be some adverse effects that cannot be reduced. In such cases, it may be necessary to compensate people for adverse effects like the loss of public recreational space or a wildlife habitat, or the provision of land with recreation facilities, or the creation of a nature reserve, like that. For the loss of privacy, so it is quietness and safety in house next to a new road, or the provision of a sound insulation, or the purchase by the developer of badly affected properties. So before any mitigating measures are put forward, the developer and the local planning authority must agree as to which effects are to be regarded as adverse or sufficiently adverse to warrant the expense of remedial work, or otherwise the whole exercise becomes a bargaining game which is likely to be unprofitable to both parties. So, planning permission frequently includes conditions requiring the provision of planning that gains by the developer to offset some deterioration of the area that is caused by the development. But it is essential to differentiate very clearly between those benefits which are offered by the way of compensation for adverse environmental effects and those which are a formal part of planning consent. The local planning authority may decide to formulate the compensation proposals as a planning condition in order to ensure that they are carried out. So, the developer should beware of putting forward proposals that he or she does not really intend to implement. Mitigation measures must be planned which is in integration of the coherent fashion to ensure that they are effective, that they do not conflict with each other, that also we have to make it a point, and that they do not merely shift a problem from one medium to another. And also a project may also benefit an area, of course it is a socio-economically, in such benefits are identified prior to that. As a minimum, there should be a concern to ensure that they do occur and do not become diluted, and that they may even be enhanced. For example, the potential local employment benefits of a project that can be encouraged by the offering of appropriate skill training programs to local people. And there was too much emphasis on physical measures rather than an operational or management controls, and also lack of attention to the impacts of construction and to residual impacts after mitigation. So, I've drafted a good practice guide that results from the research project that introduces the concept of the mitigation hierarchy, like avoid impacts at the source and reduce impact at the source, and abate impacts on the site and abate impacts at all at receptor site, and repair impacts, and compensate in kind of the impact, and compensate by other means, and also enhance. So, these things are there. So, like many elements in the environmental impact assessment, the mitigation process is not limited to one point in the assessment. Of course, even though it is it follow logically from the prediction and assessment of the relative significance of impacts, it is a fact, it is an inherent in all aspects of the process. An original project design may already have been modified, possibly in the light of the mitigation changes that is made to earlier comparable projects, or perhaps as a result of early consultations with the local government or local people or the local community. So, the consideration of the alternatives, that is the initial scoping activities, that is the baseline studies and impact identification studies, that may suggest further mitigation measures. So, more in-depth studies may identify new impacts, mitigation measures, and also it will reduce the others. So, the prediction and evaluation exercise that will be focused on a limited range of potential impacts. Example of a section of a summary table for impacts and mitigation measures, impact mitigation measurements, and a level of significance after mitigation. So, these things we have to consider. So, the impact is 400 acres of the prime agricultural land would be lost from the country to accommodate a petrochemical plant. So, the mitigation measure is the only full mitigating measure for this impact would be to abandon the project. So, a significant unavoidable impact, we have to consider this one. If you will see that the impact is, for example, additional lorry and car traffic on the adjacent hilly section of the motorway will increase traffic volumes by 10 to 20% or above, and those predicted on the basis of the current trends. So, the mitigation measure over here is a lorry crawler lane on the motorway funded by the developer will help definitely to spread the volume, but effects may partially and also short lived. So, these are the things we have to consider. Another impact also I would like to mention over here. The project would block the movement of the most terrestrial species from the hilly areas to the east of the site to the wetlands to the west of the site, for example. So in that case, the mitigation, probably a wildlife corridor should be developed and maintained along the entire length of the existing stream that runs throughout the site. So the width of the corridor should be a minimum of 75 feet. So the stream bed should be cleaned of silt also and enhanced the thorough construction as well as the occasional pools. The buffer zone should be planned with native riparian vegetation, that is includes sycamore or and willows, that is significant unavoidable impacts as well as to avoid the less than significant impact. And next step is auditing in practice. So auditing is already developing a considerable variety of types. So it is a set of terms for 7 different points of audit in the standard environmental impact assessment process. That is a decision point audit by regulatory authority in the planning approval process, and a decision point audit that is also by regulatory authority in the planning approval process, and implementation audit that it is to cover to start up. It could be has scrutiny by the government and the public and focus on the proponent compliance with mitigation and other imposed conditions, or it may be a performance audit that is to cover full operation, and it could also maybe incorporate the government and public scrutiny, and predictive techniques audit that is to compare actual with the predicted impacts as a means of comparing the value of different predictive techniques, and also project impact audits that is also to compare actual with predictable impacts and to provide feedback for improving project management and for future projects. And procedure audit, that is the external reviews or of the procedures that are used by the government and industry during the environmental impact assessment process. And also these terms can also do overlap sometimes. So the focus here is on the project, performance and the implementation audits. So whatever it is the focus, auditing faces a number of major problems. So many researchers identified that it often contain a very testable predictions that may only relate to relatively minor impacts. So environmental parameters that are monitored may not correspond with those with the which predictions were already made. So monitoring techniques may not enable predictions to be tested because inter alia time periods and as well as locations do not match. There are too few examples are there. So projects are almost always modified between the design used for environmental impact assessment and also in practice. So monitoring data provided by the developers or project proposers, they may possibly be biased towards their interest. Dear learner, so far we have understood about different measurement techniques of environmental impact assessment. I would like to conclude here, that is the impact prediction and the evaluation of the significance of impacts are normally constituted a black box in environmental impact assessment studies. Intuition that is wrapped up as an expert opinion that cannot provide a firm and defensible foundation for this important stage of the process. So various methods that are ranges from simple to complex are available to the analyst, and these can help to underpin analysis. Mitigation measures come into play particularly at the final stage. However, the increasing sophistication of some methods that does run the risk of cutting out key actors and especially the public from the environmental impact assessment process. Monitoring involves the measuring and recording of physical, social and economic variables which are associated with the developmental impacts like traffic flows or air quality, noise and employment level, all these things are concerned. So I hope you will be definitely benefited with these measurement techniques of environmental impact assessment. Thank you.